Hello, it's so good to see you here. But first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity this channel is giving me to tell my story. So please subscribe so you don't miss any videos, and share this video so it can help someone going through the same thing I did. With that said, let's get to my family revenge, which is called At My Wedding, My In-Laws Said, You Don't Belong Here, so I took back the house they live in. You won't believe what I'm about to tell. It's one of those stories that sounds like a movie, but I swear on my life it happened to me. And the ending, well, let's just say karma does exist. And sometimes it comes with compound interest. It all started on what should have been the happiest day of my life. My wedding to David was perfect. White flowers everywhere, that dress I dreamed about for months, and all our friends and family gathered in the small church in our town in rural Oregon. I was radiant, floating on a cloud of happiness. Until the moment my in-laws decided to turn my dream into a nightmare. Margaret and Robert Hamilton had always treated me with a coldness I tried to ignore. From the first day David took me to meet them, I noticed the disapproving looks, the subtle comments about my humble origins, the way they made a point of mentioning other girls who would be better suited for their son. But David always defended me, always said that in time they would accept me. How wrong I was. The ceremony was over, we were at the reception, and I was finally beginning to relax. People were laughing, dancing, toasting our happiness. My mother was crying with joy in the corner, my father trying to impress the guests with his stories of his youth. It was exactly as I had imagined. That's when Margaret approached me. She was elegant as always, in her expensive navy blue dress and that pearl necklace she insisted on wearing on every special occasion. The smile on her face was icy, calculated. "Darling," she said, placing her hand on my arm with a false gentleness that made my skin crawl, "I need a word with you." I thought it was some mother-in-law's advice, perhaps even an apology for years of cold treatment. How naive I was. Margaret pulled me to a more secluded corner of the room, near the windows overlooking the garden. Robert appeared soon after, as if they'd arranged it. The two of them surrounded me, and suddenly I felt like cornered prey. "Listen carefully, young lady," Robert began, his voice low but laced with venom. "You may have fooled our son with your cheap charms, but we know exactly who you are." My heart began to race. This wasn't happening. Not at my wedding. Not on the most important day of my life. Margaret leaned closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the scent of red wine. "You don't belong here," she whispered, but with an intensity that made each word pierce my soul like a dagger. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. David sensed something was wrong when I returned to our table. My smile was forced, my energy evaporated. When he asked what happened, I lied. I said I was just emotional, tired. How could I ruin our marriage by telling him about his parents' cruelty? How could I turn him against his own family on our wedding day? But those words kept echoing in my head. You don't belong here. They haunted me during our honeymoon, during the first months of marriage, during every family dinner where I had to pretend everything was fine, while Margaret and Robert treated me with that icy, false politeness. Time passed, and things only got worse. They made comments about how I decorated our home, about my career, about my clothes. Always in front of David, but so subtly that he thought I was being overly sensitive. "It's just their way," he'd say. "They're from a different generation." But I knew the truth. I knew exactly what they thought of me ever since that night. David and I had a few happy years, despite everything. We built our life together, made plans, dreamed of the future. I could almost forget my in-laws' cruel words. Almost. Then, 5 years ago, something happened that changed everything. David was in a car accident. A drunk driver hit him on his way home from work. My world fell apart in a matter of seconds. I was at the hospital every day, holding his hand, talking to doctors, making impossible decisions. Margaret and Robert showed up every now and then, but they always made me feel like an intruder in their pain, as if I didn't have the right to suffer as much as they did. David didn't make it. After 2 weeks in a coma, he was gone, taking my heart with him. The funeral was another nightmare. Margaret and Robert took charge of everything as if I didn't exist. They chose the flowers, the casket, even the music. When I tried to offer my opinion, Margaret looked at me with that familiar coldness and said, "I think it's best to leave this to the blood family, dear." Blood family, as if 5 years of marriage meant nothing. But the worst part came after the funeral, when the lawyer read the will. David had left most of his assets to me, including his stake in some investments I hadn't even known existed. Margaret and Robert were furious. "This can't be right," Robert shouted in the lawyer's office. "David would never leave everything to her. She's a freeloader." Margaret was more controlled, but just as venomous. "We're going to challenge this. Our family built this fortune. We're not going to let this opportunist have it all." They tried, of course. They spent a fortune on lawyers trying to prove that I had manipulated David, that the will was invalid, that I deserved nothing. But David had been careful. Everything was legal, documented, irrefutable. During these years of legal battle, I discovered some interesting things about my beloved in-laws. I discovered, for example, that the house where they lived, that beautiful Victorian mansion downtown that they were so proud of, wasn't actually theirs. They paid rent. And I discovered who the real owner was. Apparently, David's grandfather had bought the property in the 1950s as an investment. When he died, the house passed to David's father, who allowed his parents to live there for a nominal rent. When David's father died, the property passed to David. And when David died, well, it passed to me. Margaret and Robert had been living in my house for years without knowing it. The legal battle lasted 3 years. 3 years of hearings, depositions, personal attacks. They tried everything, from questioning my sanity to suggesting that I had poisoned David. It was humiliating, painful, exhausting. But I held firm. Every time they attacked me, I remembered that night at my wedding. "You don't belong here." Those words had become my motivation. I was going to prove to them exactly where I belonged. Finally, last year, the judge ruled. All of David's assets were legally mine. Margaret and Robert lost their appeal and still had to pay the court costs. That's when I had the most delightful idea of my life. I was in my lawyer's office signing the last papers when he casually mentioned, "By the way, did you know you own the house where your former in-laws live?" My heart almost stopped. "What do you mean?" He showed me the documents. The house was registered in David's name, who had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his grandfather. It was one of the most valuable properties in the city, valued at almost $2 million. "Do they pay rent?" I asked. Apparently, they paid David a nominal amount, $300 a month, if I'm not mistaken. $300 for a mansion that would fetch at least $8,000 on the market. I almost laughed at the irony. That night, I went home and did my homework. I researched property rights, rental laws, and eviction procedures. I talked to a real estate agent about the house's true market value. Then, I devised my plan. First, I sent a certified letter to Margaret and Robert, informing them that, as the new owner of the house, I would be adjusting the rent to market value, $8,500 a month, with a retroactive increase of 6 months. Total due? $51,000.
The letter arrived on a Monday. On Tuesday, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. "You can't do this," Margaret screamed on the other end of the line. "We've owned this house for 40 years. "Actually, Margaret," I replied in the calmest voice I could muster, "the house was never yours. You were always renters, and now I'm the owner. But David would never charge us that absurd amount. David is gone, and you made it very clear at my wedding that I don't belong in the family, so I'm going to treat you as what you are, renters. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You remember my wedding, don't you, Margaret? When you said I didn't belong here, that I was temporary? Well, it seems you were the temporary ones. I'm still here. They tried to negotiate, of course. They offered $1,000, then $2,000, then $4,000 a month. But I wasn't interested in negotiating. They had 30 days to pay the full amount or leave the house. You were doing this out of revenge, Robert accused me when he showed up at my door a week later. No, Robert. I'm doing this because I'm a businesswoman. This is valuable property, and I have every right to charge fair market value. David would be disappointed in you. This attempt at manipulation made me laugh. David would be disappointed in you for treating his wife so cruelly. He would be disappointed that you tried to steal the inheritance he left me. He would be disappointed that you never gave me a chance. The 30 days passed. They didn't pay, of course. How could they? They lived on retirement and the small income from some investments. $51,000 was more money than they had. On the morning of the 31st day, the bailiff showed up at their door with the eviction notice. I was across the street in my car watching it all out. I saw Margaret cry as the bailiff explained they had 24 hours to leave the property. I saw Robert try to argue, yell, and threaten legal action. I watched them leave the house they'd considered theirs for 40 years, carrying suitcases and boxes. They moved to a small apartment on the other side of town. I heard from mutual friends that they're having financial difficulties, that Margaret had to sell her jewelry to pay the deposit on the new place. I renovated the house and rented it to a lovely family for $8,500 a month. The money is helping fund the charitable foundation I created in David's memory. Some people in town think I was cruel. They say they're old, that I should have shown compassion, but they don't know the whole story. They don't know how Margaret and Robert treated me for years. They weren't there at my wedding when they told me I didn't belong here, that I was temporary. Well, it seems you were the temporary ones. I'm still here. Last week, I ran into Margaret at the supermarket. She looked different, thinner, dressed more simply, without that air of superiority she always carried. When she saw me, she quickly looked away. But I approached her. "Hi, Margaret. How are you?" She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and defeat. "What do you want?" "I just wanted you to know," I said, keeping my voice soft and polite, "that I've finally found my place. It turns out I belonged here all along. You just didn't realize it." She didn't answer. She finished her shopping quickly and left. Today, 5 years after David's death, I've finally found peace. Not just because of revenge, although I confess it was satisfying, but because I've learned something important about belonging. It's not about where you're born or who your parents are. It's about who you choose to be, about how you face adversity, about your ability to rise up when they try to tear you down. Margaret and Robert thought they could break me with cruel words. They thought they would define me as someone who didn't belong here. But in the end, they were the ones who lost their place. They discovered their roots weren't as deep as they thought. And me? I've finally found where I belong. Right here, building a life that honors the memory of the man I loved, helping others through my foundation, and remembering every day that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them wrong about you. David would have been proud, I'm sure, not for the revenge, but for the strength I found. For the woman I became after all this suffering, for the way I transformed the pain into something constructive. Sometimes when I pass by the old Hamilton house, my home now, I smile. Because every time I look at it, I remember Margaret's face when the bailiff knocked on the door. I remember the exact moment she realized that this girl who didn't belong here was, in fact, the owner of the place. And that, my friends, is worth more than any excuse they could have given me.
If you liked this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Leave your opinion in the comments. I'll be here. And until next time.